Welcome to Stories from Foster Care, a podcast from the Irish Foster Care Association. I'm Niamh Barrett, and on today's episode, I had the great pleasure of speaking to Catherine Joyce. For over 35 years, Catherine has been a member of the Irish Travellers' Human Rights Movement, winning Person of the Year in 1991 for her contribution to progressing traveller, human, social and cultural rights. For the past 16 years, she's been the co-manager of Blanchardstown Traveller Development Group. She's also a theatre maker and collaborator. This year, she collaborated with Toby Omotezu to produce the film Us for the Project Art Centre in partnership with RTE Culture. She is a strong advocate for the rights of traveller children, including traveller children in care, and has been a foster carer herself.
In the pre-assessment of all children, there was never a question about what is your attitude towards travellers, what is your attitude towards other ethnic minority groups. There was no intercultural, multicultural diversity training for the foster parents. At least we didn't receive it. But I think the dual identity of a child within the lesson system, whether they're members of the traveller community or another ethnic minority group, is vitally important to that child, because if you erode the fact that they're from a different culture, well then they're going through that placement for whatever duration they're with you, not knowing that their identity is a positive thing. They're being told by default that their identity needs to be hidden.
Myself and Catherine spoke over Zoom, and from time to time there was a little bit of audio dropout, so apologies for any dips in audio quality. So Catherine, you're very welcome to the Stories from Foster Care podcast.
Thanks very much, Niamh, and thanks for having me.
Catherine, could we start at the beginning? Could you tell us a bit about yourself? Where were you born? Where did you grow up?
Yeah, well, I suppose like most travellers, I have a little bit of history of travelling and being nomadic. I was born in Dublin in 1969 and reared in Navan until I was about 13. So my primary school life was in Navan in County Meath. And then at the age of 13, we moved back to Dublin to live on an unofficial site for quite a number of years, where we successfully negotiated with Fingal County Council to build a site on the Navan Road for our extended family. So I spent most of my adult life as a young mother on the Navan Road with my extended family. And then again, 14 years ago, we moved back up to County Meath. So I'd like to say that it's home for life, but I'm not too sure about that. But I started then obviously during those years working with travellers when I was 15 or 16 years of age, and have worked continuously on traveller human rights. And myself and my husband have worked on a number of different fields and a range of different areas in trying to progress, I suppose, traveller human rights to a range of different arenas. So that's through the arts, through community development, through mobilisation, protests, a range of different things. And I think, as you said earlier, I represented travellers at a number of different international conferences, including the Conference Against Racism and Xenophobia in South Africa in 1991.
Catherine, what got you started in traveller human rights activism? Like, what was the spark, or was there one spark?
Yeah, I suppose when I started the training programme it was a basic community development programme. I wasn't interested in travellers, and because you're a member of the traveller community, you don't actually get to examine your life very often as a member of the traveller community, because you're living it. So unless you have some kind of external influence that either influences that in a positive way or a negative way, you don't really think about being a traveller every day of the life when you're living on a site or when you're going to school or going to work. So the first community development course I'd done in 1985, I suppose, was my first exposure to the injustices in society against members of the traveller community, of which I was a part of. And I suppose the thing that sparked my mind most about that was that there was 34 of us in the room, and we all had similar experiences of being discriminated against, called names in the schoolyard, segregation within the school system, living on traveller accommodation, the lack of facilities on some of those sites and accommodation. But I suppose more importantly, our experience of discrimination united us all. And some people in that course went on to work within the traveller sector and some didn't. But I suppose my interest, once it was spiked, I couldn't turn it off. It was like a light bulb going on saying, we have to do something about this. Now, there were some very influential people at that time in the Dublin Travellers Education Development Group, and Mincare's Mistley, including my uncle and his wife, who were members of that. And they'd been out protesting for quite a while in Dublin City Council offices and Fingal County Council, or Dublin County Council offices at the time. And to the extent that they chained themselves to walls and like really physical protests that they were involved in. And when I became aware of that, I couldn't switch it off. So I just said, look, what's my part in this, and where can I play a part in it?
So since the age of 15 or 16, you've been an activist in this area. That's amazing.
Yeah.
You're a very strong voice for the rights of traveller children in care. Catherine, when did that come up for you as an area that needed particular attention?
Yeah, just to say, currently I'm actually the Irish Traveller Movement rep on the Children's Rights Alliance. So it's not just children in care as my interest. I think when we look at accommodation and education and all of those, I tend to do it as well. We tend to talk generically about travellers and the impact on travellers, and we don't decompartmentalise some of the stuff that goes on within the effects of it within the community. So how is no accommodation impacting on travellers, and how is it impacting on traveller children within that community and society? So I suppose my interest through human rights has been, I suppose, redirected in a number of different fields, but in particular in relation to looking after the rights of children within the travel community and looking at sustaining progress where they can actually interact in mainstream education, mainstream employment opportunities, but that they can see that that's an option, that it's not something that they have to fight for all the time, that there is real opportunities created for travellers to engage in mainstream society, communities, and in education. I currently sit on a group that's reviewing the curriculum in this primary school and secondary school, post-primary, to look at including and inserting aspects of the traveller culture into the mainstream curriculum. So I've, I suppose, a vast area. In relation to children in foster care, I suppose my interest was stemmed out of my own experience of fostering children. And I'd done that for a long time as a kinship carer. So my mother and father died, unfortunately, when they were quite young. So because I was the eldest girl in a family of 14, we had taken on, with the support of the extended family, we had taken on to look after my mother's children. The youngest at the time was 13 and the oldest was 17, going on 18 years of age. So I suppose myself and my husband took on to look after them. It came to a stage where we actually had to go to court and get a legal document to say that we were the carers for these four siblings who were left behind. But I mean, the reality for us was we were doing that as the eldest sister, and my husband, who was married to me, we were doing that within our own setting. So I suppose my lived experience of caring for children down through the years, so not just the four belong to my mother and father, members of our extended family on and off have come to live with us, sometimes for years, sometimes for 6 months, sometimes for 3 months, sometimes for more than 2 years. And we've always, I suppose, made our home open to members of our extended family that if they needed somewhere, that they could come to us. And on one occasion, we had a member of the settled community come and stay with us for 3 months. She was homeless for 3 months, and she was a good friend of one of my daughters, and she had really nowhere to go. And she came and lived with us on the site for just over 3 months. So we took her in. Then we moved to outside Dublin. We moved to County Meath, and one of my sisters had an issue with substance abuse and other issues, and she was subject to domestic violence and other things were going on with her. But I could see that the children were being put in very vulnerable situations. So they had come to live with me voluntarily first, and then she took them back, and then they came to live with me, and we had to get a court order in place. So we became the legal fostering parents for 3 or 4 children over the course of the years. The youngest was only 6 months old. I suppose my activism around children in care really didn't stem until we were outside the fostering situation, when we had completed our fostering of those children. And I suppose it stemmed from some of the negative experiences that we had as foster carers of children. And I was trying to look at, was there other people out there in the travel community that experienced this level of frustration? And but I suppose where my interest came was about how do you make it easier, not just for the people who are fostering children, but for the children who are going through the care system. So I suppose that's where my focus came, and I started to develop a pack which would be delivered. It was an intercultural, anti-racist training pack for carers, for social workers, for the link workers, the gals, all of the people who were involved in the care of children from the travel community who were in care.
What would you say that foster carers from the settled community taking a traveller child into their care, like what do we need to understand?
But I think the most important thing, and I've done this in one of the articles I've done for the journal, I think it's about looking after and minding and protecting the dual identity of a child when they're in care, when they're from the travel community. Because yes, we're white, we're Irish, and in some cases we live in houses, but we're also got a whole heritage and culture that is different to that of the settled community. So I suppose the most important thing for me would be that there is an obligation, not just a willingness, but there's an obligation for them to look at how they will take care of the dual identity of children who are in care. I've had some really, really bad experience of listening to not just traveller children themselves, but foster parents who are not travellers, saying that they had child in their care and X wanted to cut their hair so they didn't look like a traveller anymore, or somebody else wanted to change their second name and drop a name because they didn't want to be associated with members of the travel community. And those things were being facilitated, not just by the carers, but also by the services that were linking in with them. So they were approving these measures, which to me seemed like an erosion of their cultural identity. And maybe that was because the child associated them being placed in care with the fact that they were a member of the travel community, but not all children who were in care are members of the travel community. So how do you manage to cater for the appropriate placement of a child, but also looking after their identity? And I use the example, like if a child from a Black or an African community ended up in care, they wouldn't try to wash that child white. So why would you try to wash the identity of a traveller child out of them? And we have lots of experiences of travellers coming out of care, not all of them negative, but most of them coming out not knowing that they were members of the traveller community when they were in the placement. And then in some cases, when they did find out, that being a negative experience for them.
So are you advocating for like everybody to be educated on the need for some link back into that child's cultural identity as a traveller, and for that to be an education that's rolled out to everybody involved in the care of the child?
Yeah, when I'm delivering the training, Niamh, I do it I do it in a way that's not negative, and I don't try and enforce my ideology on foster parents. What I try and do is give an input and give them options for making life easier for them as foster carers, but also for the child that's in their care system. So I was saying to them, like, if you went to South America, to Cuba or wherever, and you were adopting a child or fostering a child from that region and bringing them back to Ireland, some of the basic things that you would do is find out a little bit about the culture, where it is geographically on the map, the kind of foods that you eat, customs, beliefs, value systems. If there was regional differences within the country, you'd maybe look at what they were. You might incorporate them into your home. You might just put little symbols of that reflect their life from the country that they came from throughout your home and through your books and the stuff that's in the thing. Why can't we do that for traveller children? Why can't we make the placement, whether it's for 3 months, whether it's for 3 years, or whether it's for the lifetime of the child in care? Why can't we make them placements more culturally appropriate and more culturally visible for the child that's in the care system? I think the other detrimental flaw that's there is that in the pre-assessment of all parents, like we had to do it as foster parents when we were taking on my siblings' children, there's a pre-assessment process, and it's a long, arduous process in terms of trying to get there. Now, I know it's changing and people are making it more easier, but within the whole context of that, there was never a question about what is your attitude towards travellers? What is your attitude towards other ethnic minority groups? There was no intercultural, multicultural diversity training for the foster parents. At least we didn't receive it. Okay, there might have been little snippets of it throughout bits of literature and all of that kind of stuff, but there was no real assessment of what our views were or what we were going to be doing from that point of view in terms of looking at, and I know health and safety is a priority. I know having a safe home, a place where they can sleep, I know all of that is important, but I think the dual identity of a child within the placement system, whether they're members of the traveller community or another ethnic minority group, is vitally important to that child, because if you erode the fact that they're from a different culture, well then they're going through that placement for whatever duration they're with you, not knowing that their identity is a positive thing. They're being told by default that their identity needs to be hidden. So I suppose my thing is that there needs to be changes, significant changes in the pre-assessment phase, but also in terms of across the board, not just with the foster parents, link workers, social workers, the guardians ad litem, anybody, judges, anyone that has a role in making a decision about this child's placement need to be involved in intercultural, anti-racist and cultural diversity training.
You're listening to the Stories from Foster Care podcast. Be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Catherine, when you're maybe hearing stories of how children have fared, traveller children have fared in care placements, how does that racism show up, or how do those misconceptions show up?
As I said, Niamh, it's not sometimes that it's built in deliberately that racism is there and it's expressed. But if you have a child that's in placement and like one case of a scenario where the child was in a placement and they were never told they were a member of the traveller community, and a traveller woman would come to the house every week or every second week, and that child was in the room when this traveller woman was being brought in. And the woman would give her a cup of tea and she'd give her a cup of coffee or whatever. She'd have a chat and maybe they'd exchange needles for a bit of bread or whatever it'd be, tea bags and sugar. And this went on for a long time while this child was in placement. And it turned out that child was actually looking at her own grandmother for the length of time that she was in the placement of this person. So when she was told that she was a member of the traveller community, she was let off at the end of the road so she could run into the site, and she was picked up at the end of the road. Like there was always a negative difference about travellers and settled people within that child's experience. There was another traveller, young fella, that came to me, and it was literally the day he came out of the care system. And I was finishing up work in town. I was working with the Irish Traveller Movement at the time. And he came to the door and he was looking for information. I said, look, I'm literally going out the door. Can you come back? And he said, look, I just want to explain who I am. So he told me his name, that he was just out of care. He was reared with settled people. His experience in care was quite positive. He had a good education and seen the values of that. But he came out the door and was just told that he was a member of the traveller community. And that was it. And he was looking for me. It was like a sponge. He was looking for information about who travellers were, where they live, what's their culture different than the culture he was reared in, where would his extended family be. Now, because of the geographical locations of different family member names, I was able to guide him. And I said, if you don't get somewhere there, come back to me, and whatever else. I hadn't heard from him since. And I couldn't even repeat his name because I can't remember his name. It was that long ago. But his whole thing was that he came out of the care system and now he has this identity that he never knew was part of his life. And he said, I literally feel like I'm standing with me 2 legs on 2 stools and I'm in the middle of it and I don't know where I'm going to fall. Yeah. And that was his experience. Even though he had a positive placement and experience, when he was coming out of the care system, it got quite negative for him. And we know for a lot of travellers who were in the care system who come out after a couple of years in care, they have quite similar experiences of that. Now, we see other traveller children and parents literally erode their identity. Like I heard of one grandmother when she went on a family visit, the child's hair was cut from being waist length up to the shoulder, and she didn't look like a traveller child anymore. She didn't dress like a traveller child anymore. Now, I'm not saying that foster parents deliberately set out to do that. Maybe it's about helping them to blend in more with people that they associate. But by default, what they were doing was eroding that child's culture.
Yeah, and what's underlying it is a kind of an impression, wherever it comes from, that this culture needs to be eroded. It needs to be watered down, no matter the motivation, towards the child. That is what's underlying it.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, and I would say this about anybody that's brought up in Irish society, you cannot go through the Irish society and live in this country and not have negative opinions about travellers, because you don't hear anything positive in school. What you hear in the media, particularly the red line banner newspapers, is all negative. So if you're constantly living with that in your mind and you're brought up from a very young age as a settled person and you go on to be an adult and foster traveller children, that is in that back of your mind somewhere that these is who travellers are, because you've never had a positive experience of the traveller community. How can you teach something you've never had?
And if you're not aware of those assumptions, then you'll just keep playing them out.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that for me is important, that I'm not saying that this is the responsibility solely of the foster parents to go and do your homework. I'm not saying that the foster parents. What I'm saying is it should be inbuilt into any possible placement that's there or coming up. So anybody that's already fostering traveller children, there should be compulsory training for them. Anybody that's coming into foster traveller children, they should be inducted into anti-racism, intercultural and a cultural awareness session on who the traveller community is. And I would say this and stress it, Niamh, it's vitally important that the people who are doing that training would be skilled and equipped to do it, because you don't want members of the traveller community coming in telling people that we live in wagons. Most traveller children, even my own children and grandchildren, wouldn't associate being a traveller with being living in a wagon. So the people who are delivering this training need to be able to talk about contemporary traveller culture, and they need to be able to deliver that training in a way that gives and equips the foster parents and the children who are in care with skills to do that coping with the dual identity bit.
So if I was a foster carer and I was taking a child into my care tonight, say a traveller child, if there was one or two things you could tell me, what would they be?
I would say, first of all, look out for the child, because even within the traveller communities, we're such a diverse and complex community. Not every one of us is the same. The Collinses might have different culture or customs and beliefs and value systems than the Joyces or the McDonoughs or whoever it is. So I'd say get to know the family, the extended family of that particular grouping, and look at what is common to them or what is normal to them. I would say that go and look at getting information, and there is loads of books and loads of stories and loads of positive images out there about travellers. Go and look at what's best for your home that you could incorporate into your life without it being, well, there's the traveller shelf over there, let's go and pick something up there so we can sit down with little Johnny and read it. What can you incorporate into your lifestyle, image-wise, visually, audios, films, plays, whatever it is, that will allow this child that's in our placement to be able to see a positive reflection of their identity, and how do you nurture that within the placement. Travellers are 0.5% of the national population, so we're about 40,000 people in total, or a little over that. So it's important to understand that 7% of all the children that are in care in this country are members of the traveller community. So we have to examine why those children end up in care, why they end up in long-term care arrangements as opposed to short-term and back with their extended family or with grandparents or kinship carers. And we also have to look at the legacy that's there from when institutions were around in this country, where traveller children ended up in Derrylassery and places like long-term residential care, like Derrylassery, where they never came back to their traveller community but were brought up in institutional care systems and care homes. So I think when we're thinking about traveller children in care, it's not just about them being in placement with the parents that they're in, or the foster parents that they're in placement with, but we have to look at the legacy of how we actually got to a situation where placement of traveller children in state care or in the care of settled people evolved and developed as well over the years, because I think that's led us to where we're at today. It's very concerning when you look at the statistics and the numbers. All of our statistics are high, like suicide is higher in the traveller community, infant mortality rate is higher. But I think the fact that these children are being brought up in an identity that's different to their own is very, very striking and very concerning to somebody like me and other people in this field.
So there's a piece of research to be done as to how traveller children are ending up in care in the way that they are, in the numbers that they are.
I have a colleague here in Blanchardstown working with me, Siobhan Noctor. She's actually doing a piece of work on that. I think it's her master's on that whole issue of traveller children in care, and I've been facilitating some of the direction of the questions that she might ask, but she's going out and asking members of the traveller community about their lived experience, but also some of the state services about how these things evolved and happened.
The other side of it, Catherine, might be just to ask you, like, do many traveller couples or families actually foster? You mentioned relative care and kinship care, but are there other ways in which traveller families foster that you're aware of, or is that something that needs to be developed?
Well, there is a Traveller Children in Care service, and a specific service working with the traveller community to help recruit members of the traveller community, so they're at least culturally appropriate placements. And I'm not directly involved in them because that's a whole other field of work that they're involved in. But I know that they have been actively looking and seeking for members of the traveller community to come forward. And they've made their information and their materials much more accessible to members of the traveller community. Like when I started caring for my siblings, it was a case where they were looking for the man and woman who were going to be looking after these children or whoever. But now we have a situation where individuals can foster children. I have a couple that live quite close to me where I live in County Meath, and they're a gay couple and they're fostering 3 Trevor children. So there's loads of different types of family arrangements that are being looked at for the care of Trevor children. But I think as important as having a placement for a child, it's as important to have somebody that is put in place where they're actually being minded and safeguarded. As I said to you earlier on, Niamh, we have members of the Trevor community that have very different customs and beliefs, and families differ across the country. So it's important, even if you are a member of the Trevor community, that you incorporate some of the Trevor child's background into the future of their placement with you. And that responsibility is there for Travers the same way as it's there for settled people. Know the families that they come from, know some of the customs, beliefs and value systems that they come from, and look at how you would incorporate that into the child's placement.
Catherine, what did yourself and your husband take from your years of fostering about the system? I know you've touched on it, but is there anything that you learned through that experience that you would still like to see change still, that maybe hasn't changed yet, that needs to change?
I think if you were to ask what our experience was, it was both positive and negative. We weren't voluntarily putting ourselves out to be foster parents for any of these children that came to us. We took them out of necessity, and would probably do that same again. So we weren't voluntary looking to foster children, if you like. So our circumstances was a little bit different, and we felt our responsibility back to the children from our extended family was important, and that it was important that them children were kept within the extended family in all cases. So I suppose from that point of view, it's a little bit different anyway. But I think the thing that the negative aspects of it was that the turnover in social workers that came to visit our home was very time consuming on us as parents, foster parents. We also had our own 4 children, and we had grandchildren during the time in which we had foster children with us, living with us. But that was very time consuming. And the fact that we felt like we were educating every single one of them that came to us, there was no such thing as a situation where we were able to sit down with a person and say that we were happy that they understood what Travers were or who Travers were. So that was very time consuming. I would like to see that changing, and I would like to see that, at least if they're not fluent in what Trevor culture is about, because you won't ever get to know it all, that they at least understand what intercultural and anti-racist placements for Trevor children is, and that they're coming with that basic information when they're looking at doing the assessments and the meetings and the visits and all of that kind of stuff. The other thing I think for us was very daunting was the fact that the rights of the child are paramount, and I understand that and see that. But sometimes that child can be influenced by other people in their lives. And I think our role as foster parents, we felt that our role was diminished once we got the state services involved in the care of the children and care orders in place. Because prior to that, we had a level of, I suppose, trust and understanding within our extended family that allowed us to take on children, like my mother's children, that wasn't questioned to the same extent that the questions from the social workers were coming. So I think that can be very daunting for any parent, not just Trevor parents, well, foster parents, but any foster parent that's coming into placement. I think you need to make sure and reassure foster parents that you're there for them as well. And I know that the link workers' role is to do that, but the link workers that are coming to us don't know a whole lot about members of the Trevor community and what it's like to live in a Trevor cultural context. So if they're coming with their settled white prejudiced views, well, then that's not going to help me as a foster parent if I'm a member of the Trevor community and the children that I'm working with or in placement are members of the Trevor community. So I think that needs to change. The one thing that I would like to see changed for Trevor children who are in care, I would like some kind of a program put in place when that child is 13 or 14, because once that child hits 15 years of age and they decide they don't want to live in the placement anymore, it's a tedious role about getting that child back or letting that child go. I would like to see some kind of a program put in with Trevor children where at 14 that they maybe start to talk about Trevor culture and identity from the social worker's duty of care perspective, and that they have a program in place. I call it a memory box, but it doesn't have to be called that, but that you put symbols of that child's life into this box. You give them information about their extended family, about who Travers are, and that you gather pieces of information that's relevant to their own experience within the placement that they're in. So who their foster parents were and why they were placed there, that kind of information. So when they leave, that they're a little bit more equipped to be able to go and do a bit of research themselves and to find out how they build links back up. Because it is about building links back up with the extended Trevor community. Unfortunately, some of the traveller children who come out of care and placement who've never experienced in a positive way, they come with the prejudice and discrimination and the views that second people have brought them up with in the placement. So they have to decontaminate the brain about some of that opinions that they've created or developed, or that has been allowed to develop while they're in placement. So I call it a memory box, but it could be called something else, but some kind of a plan of exit or an exit strategy for the children who are in placement. So they're not just exiting the care placement, but they're exiting the culture that they were brought up in, and they're introduced to the culture that they're from.
Like it's just a really big piece of education that needs to happen across the board, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And Catherine, are you aware, are there groups or are there places that traveller children who are exiting care can go to meet other children and young people like themselves? Are you aware of anything like that children can access?
Not that I'm aware of, that they can, a one-stop shop where they can go to. There are traveller children in care programmes. And there are organisations out there across the country working with people. I don't have a comprehensive list of them, Niamh, but there are groups out there that are looking at traveller children in care. And there are local traveller organisations in almost every county in Ireland.
Yeah.
So if the traveller child wanted to contact the county and say they came to me in Blanchardstown and I didn't know that extended family, I might be able to ring somewhere that might have information about who the travellers in that area are. I always refer the foster parents that come to my training session to the Irish Traveller Movement website, because they have like a map of Ireland and they have a list of organisations and their phone numbers and all of that within that. I would also suggest that traveller children who are in care would be linked into some of the programmes that are available in most counties in Ireland through the Traveller Pride Week programmes. So sometimes they're national events and sometimes they're local events. So out here in Blanchardstown this year, we had one where we had a graduation for participants on a programme. We had the launch of our website. We had a planting of a tree for people who died young or died by suicide. We had a gig in the cobblestone. So there's a number of events through Traveller Pride Week events that happen in local areas that people could link into. And they could bring children and their own children, not just the traveller children, to some of the events that happen around the country. There's also fairs that are very easily identifiable with the members of the traveller community, like Ballinasloe, the Book Fair, places like that where travellers would frequent in terms of annual visits or places like that. I think those things could be linked into as well. But I think most important advice that I would give a foster parent, if you're not sure, just link in with the Irish Traveller Movement or some of the national organisations, and they will be able to direct you to some local organisation that might be able to support you in your area if you have children who are in care from the traveller community. But as I said earlier on, Niamh, it's important that the groups that are given this information, that they're given information that's accurate, that's up to date, that's contemporary. Because the last thing a foster parent needs to be told is stick a picture of a wagon on the wall and that'll help you with your cultural diversity. That will not help. A lot of travellers don't associate with living in wagons. Even though it is a rich part of our heritage and our past, it's not something that's contemporary today. So I think that you need to learn a little bit about the language, about the customs, the beliefs, the value systems. And then there's also the parish of travelling people. There's other groups like that around the country that you could link in with if you have a child or they're coming out of the care system. But I think the most important thing for any child coming out of care, don't be afraid to ask for information. I have at a number of occasions when I was doing sessions asked foster parents if there's a couple of them in a catchment area. So let's say if I'm in Galway or Sligo doing a session, I'd say, look, could you not find out of the social workers if there are other families who are fostering traveller children, and maybe just organise a sports event, a day in the Plex, a day in Park, where you were bringing the traveller children together so all the children can play together. I mean, children don't have prejudice. They're taught them. So I think if the parents of traveller children can do that collectively with their own children, if they have them, and the members of the traveller community, and link them in, but give them space to be with the traveller children as well.
That's great. There's a lot of possible pathways there, Catherine, and it sounds like it's just for foster carers to begin somewhere on behalf of the children in their care, to reach out to the Irish Traveller Movement, for example, or the Parish of Travelling People, and just start somewhere on the path.
And I've said this before, I don't think foster parents set out to be excluding traveller culture and identity. I think a lot of it is that they're afraid to say, how do I do this or how do I start that? But there are groups out there to assist them in that. You don't need the information before you take a traveller child, but what you do need, once you're aware that that child is a member of the traveller community, you need to look at ways in building in positive images of culture and identity to reinforce positive stories and messages. As I said, there are a lot of books and curriculum. I know Mary I in Limerick done a lot of books for primary school level and preschool level, and they've jigsaw puzzles and stuff like that. Things like that all the children can play with. It doesn't have to be just Traveller children.
Catherine, it's been really great to talk to you, and it's just you've been such an activist for so long, and it's so clear what needs to happen, and hopefully those resources will come about. But certainly people like yourself are really a great resource for people caring for children from the travelling community. So thank you so much. I'm sure there's people listening who have found this really helpful and have some ideas of where to go next. Is there anything you'd like to say before we finish up?
No, the only thing I suppose from my point of view is I have a concern about the volume of travellers that are in the care system. Children are in the care system, the length of time that they spend in care. So as foster parents, what I would say to anybody out there, whether you're a member of the travel community or the SAT community, if you're fostering a traveller child, it doesn't matter if they're 3 or if they're 15, if you're fostering a traveller child, please see it as your duty of care to look after their dual identity while they're in your placement.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Catherine. Thanks very much. It's been great talking to you.
Thank you.
That was a really powerful conversation with Catherine. She recommended reaching out for more information to organisations such as the Irish Traveller Movement, the Parish of the Travelling People, or her own organisation, Blanchardstown Traveller Development Group. Also, keep an eye out for Traveller Pride Week, which takes place around June or July of each year. Thanks for listening.